Continuing to read from Lama Yeshe Losal Rinpoche's From a Mountain in Tibet, from page 165. Throughout my first year in retreat, I was haunted by images of my escape from Tibet. I thought obsessively about the loss of my family. The nightmares I had suffered for years came with even more frequency, and I spent my waking hours tormented by painful memories and imagining what might have become of my loved ones. I was grieving. I was processing the loss and the trauma that I had spent years evading. This is typical of what happens when we sit down to do meditation, especially as we go deeper into our practice. Prolonged meditation can unearth deeply buried thoughts and emotions. This is precisely what happened to me. I knew I needed to address this problem because if I did not, it would become a big obstacle to my progress. So I cultivated the thought that those Chinese soldiers who had shot at us and still chased me in my dreams were not the enemy. They were not responsible for my suffering. In fact, they too had suffered through that event. The only ones who were truly responsible were the leaders of the People's Republic of China, Mao and Zhou Enlai. But they too were sentient beings and were laboring under the spell of ignorance and confusion. It occurred to me that by going to the root of my hatred and fear, I might be able to purify those feelings. So I decided to incorporate both Mao and Chao into my prostration practice. Typically, we do prostrations while visualizing our Father and all male sentient beings on our right-hand side, and our Mother and all female sentient beings on our left-hand side. I visualized Mao and Zhou standing very close to me and imagined they were doing the practice with me. I did this over and over again. Then, one night, I had a very auspicious dream. I dreamed that I had opened up a grocery shop in New York. So I had gone from a clothes boutique in Dumfries to a food store in New York. Mao and Cho were my assistants. In my dream, they bustled about with aprons on, stocking shelves and serving customers. After that, I had no more nightmares. And I found it much easier to turn my waking thoughts away from disturbing memories and imaginings. My mind began to settle, and I felt more at peace. I often tell this story to my students when they come to me with feelings of despondency about their practice. It is not unusual to run into obstacles once we get beyond the initial honeymoon phase of meditation. Some people lose heart and want to give up. I advise them to persevere, to be patient and hold faith with their practice, because even our most deeply seated obstacles can hold the key to freedom. This is what I discovered with the story of Mao and Zhou. So good things were happening to me, but it was still tough. Some days I felt like giving up. Then in 1981, an opportunity presented itself for me to escape from retreat, and I very nearly took it. Akon wrote to me with the news that the Chinese had relaxed their restrictions on visiting Tibet. He had managed to go back for the first time since our escape, and discovered that our parents were still living in our homeland. I could do the same. I was overjoyed to hear that they were still alive, and immediately hatched a plan to see them. I had some money in the bank. I was determined to go. It seemed perfectly justifiable to me, because there was no knowing how much longer they would live. And in Buddhism, it is important to revere and respect one's parents. Though I had to admit to myself that part of my motivation, a large part in fact, was to get out of retreat, since it was so much tougher than I possibly could have imagined. I told Khenpo Karthar my intention the next time he visited me. I thought he would agree that I could pop over to Tibet and then come back and just carry on. Instead, he looked at me with a very stern expression and said quite calmly, "If you try to leave the retreat cabin, I will break both your legs." I just stared at him in shock. He didn't so much as blink. That was the moment I realized that Khenpo Karthar was as uncompromising as the great Tibetan masters of old. His words put a stop to any thought of escape, and I resolved never to bring the issue up again. Not that he gave me the opportunity. He didn't visit me for 6 months after that conversation. He just left me to stew in my own juices. I felt terribly ashamed after this, because it was clear to me that though I did of course long to see my family, the visit would have been a pretext to run away from retreat, as I had run away from every challenge I'd ever faced. I had pandered to my mind's whims all my life, and this was the source of my difficulties. Being in retreat was not the problem. The problem was that I had not yet tamed my mind. This realization was a great blessing, because things then became very clear. There was a direct link between how I related to my mind and how much happiness or unhappiness I experienced. If I went along with my old habits, if I had left the retreat, for example, it would be gratifying in the short term, but over the long term I would not be happy, and I would not find any authentic meaning in my life. This was a hugely significant moment for me. I felt I had understood the cause of my unhappiness for the first time. Even more crucially, I could see the way out. This was the realization that the Buddha came to when he left his life of luxury as a prince and wandered alone into the wilderness to meditate. Once he attained enlightenment, his profound realization was encapsulated in his very first teaching, called the Four Noble Truths. He described the first truth as the truth of suffering. The second is the truth of the cause of suffering. The third is the truth of the end of suffering. And the fourth is the truth of the path that leads to the end of suffering. To put this teaching simply, painful events are unavoidable in life. We fall ill, fall out of love, are hurt, hurt others, and eventually die. The suffering we experience as a result of these events is typically compounded by our mind's treatment of these events. It is always painful to be betrayed in love, say, but once the initial shock has passed, our reaction to the event is what determines how much we suffer. Our mind is the true source of our suffering, and if we can turn to face it and observe how it is enslaved to habits of attachment and aversion, we have the opportunity to free ourselves from suffering. This is not the work of an instant for any of us, but it is perfectly possible. We accomplish it by perfecting the essentials of Buddhist training: ethical conduct, meditation practice, and wisdom, all of which are contained in the early Buddhist teaching, the Noble Eightfold Path. Buddha's core teaching landed like a blow in my heart. I felt profoundly touched, and my commitment to retreat was redoubled. Now was the time to take things seriously and make proper use of this precious human life. I asked Akon to pass on my heartfelt message to our parents, and then returned all my focus to my practice. There was no more time to mess around. Even today, I still feel infinitely grateful to Khenpo Karthar for his intervention and for all the instruction he subsequently gave me. My first long retreat was the making of me. I have no doubt that my life would have turned out very differently if I had left it early. About this time, His Holiness the 16th Karmapa returned to the United States to receive treatment for the cancer that had spread throughout his body. As a gesture of renunciation, I sent him $15,000, which was all the money in my bank account. The money that I'd planned to spend on the trip to Tibet. I also sent him some valuable silver offering bowls and a big tanka painting, which were some of my most prized possessions. When he received the money and the gifts, he did not thank me. The message he sent back read, "If you are so intent on giving up all your wealth and possessions, then why have you not sent me your fancy bed?" I was stunned. How could His Holiness have known that the only object of value I had retained was the traditional meditation box that doubled as my bed? His powers of clairvoyance were legendary and always served to increase my faith in Him. His Holiness died shortly afterwards. I was briefly saddened, but my overwhelming feeling was of gratitude for having known this remarkable man, and for the benevolence he always showed me. I never lost my feeling that he looks over me. Of course, I have in any case been privileged to meet him again, in his next incarnation as His Holiness the 17th Jalwa Karmapa, whose discovery and enthronement were two of the most joyous moments of my life. During the months after my realization of the nature of suffering, I continued to struggle. Kalu Rinpoche, the revered meditation master who had been one of the 16th Karmapa's foremost students, came to KTD and visited me in my retreat cabin. I had met him before in Samiling. He used to say of me during the Samiling years that I was the worst Tibetan he had ever met. Now he was immensely helpful to me. Once, when I complained about the noise of the construction site outside my window, Kalu Rinpoche said briskly, "That is not a problem. Just make the noise part of your practice." He said that I should be prepared to die in retreat if need be. That was the kind of attitude I needed to overcome the obstacles in my path.
Oh.
Continuing from A Mountain in Tibet, from page 170.
Oh. Well, I knew once it was in treat by well things would get a bit tougher. Starting to get tough. Yes. And when I got the letter about his family, see, once you're busy practicing, your mind is occupying your practice all the time. But once you relax a bit, that gives the Maras a chance to come in. And that was the Maras. It was when we wanted to try and get a retreat, that was the Maras working on them. Right?
The obstacle makers.
Yes. As soon as you relax a bit, the Maras, a big chance to move in. Yes. Yeah. So I'm sure also when Lama Yeshe got back on, he was aware of that,
Yeah, I could tell what was happening.
Yeah, he knew.
Had enough experience to be able to see what the drama was.
Yes, aye. And it's nice he got all these visitors coming to give him the rest of the teaching he needed,
Yeah, his timing was beautiful, wasn't it? Because he was at KTD at a time when all these masters were coming through, so he had such a benefit.
Yeah.
Of being in the right place at the right time.
Yes. So that was quite good. So when I heard a word about the Karmapa dying, then I think, but it's my opinion, Karmapa's high level, he can take people's suffering on. He can take other people's suffering onto him. And in my opinion, and my idea is that suffering He took off with people, manifested in his cancer because he knew it was time to leave. He picked his time and wanted to leave, and while he was leaving, he took all that suffering on him and it manifested in the cancer. But that's my opinion, just my opinion, right? Yeah.
So it was a way he could turn the death into something that could be very beneficial for so many beings.
Yes, aye. But he's able to do these things, you know. Yes. And it's just all through the obstacle makers that was coming up. Well,
yes.
Practice.
He had the strength of his practice to back him up.
And he knew how to overcome the Maras.
That's right.
Overcome them, yes. The Maras can always be a big, big obstacle in retreat. As soon as you relax a bit, that's a big chance of moving in on you, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's why you've got to keep going. You've got to keep practice, keep it going all the time, and not letting up, just keep going, you know. That's what you've got to do.
Yeah, the consistency and the continuity.
Yeah, your consistency.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was quite good. Good to get all these lovely big practices coming on. The 6 yogas, Vajrayogini and them, you know, White Tara and others, you know. That would keep them quite busy for a while practicing those. Some of the texts can be quite thick, you know, like that, you know.
Yes.
So it gives you a lot to work on. So.
Well, when he gave an overview of his daily program, it was quite full, wasn't it? From 3 o'clock in the morning until he went to bed at 8 at night.
Yeah.
There weren't a lot of breaks. It was mostly one thing right after the other.
Yeah.
And he would have the benefit of that focused concentration in that way during all those years of practice, building up a huge reservoir of spiritual energy.
Yeah. So he managed to come through it all, so it's quite good.
Yes.
That was very nice.
He probably discovered strengths he didn't know that he had and capacities he hadn't realized.
Yep.
And parts of himself he hadn't tapped into before he was in that situation and under those circumstances.
Yeah.
He would have discovered a whole new side of himself in the process.
That's right. That's when you make all the discoveries about yourself, you know.
So we rejoice and celebrate that. What a lovely use of the time that he had.
Yeah. His
precious human life, and we're benefiting you from it because he's sharing it in this book.
And he's got the reading the 4 Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. They're all good practices, you know. They're all very good, you know.
He's referring back to the texts.
Yeah. Well, you've got to refer back to the text, yeah. So keep them going. Keep the practice going. Make sure you turn it over and over and over in your mind until it's very clear and you understand it properly, you know.
Yes.
That's what you got to do.
The diligence pays off.
That was very important, you know.
And the thoroughness pays off. And the commitments pay off.
Yeah. And the joyful effortless is a good thing, to have joyful effortlessness.
Yes.
Maybe you got to do effort at first before you develop joyful effortlessness. You got to enjoy effort first, and then the joyful effortlessness comes after.
Yes. It can be explained that way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And we're grateful for Lama Yeshe Rinpoche sharing it all. So we can have this time with him as we go through the book. It brings us closer. We're very grateful.
Yeah. Righty.